Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you've left for me in the comments section below this video. So if you have questions for me, while during the course of this, or you've had questions for me, just leave them in the comments section below here on this video. This is our 23rd episode, and I think I've been doing a pretty good job so far of not repeating myself, which means that, we've been answering a lot of questions from you guys and still have a lot more to go. So keep them coming. And also your comments and feedback on these are also very interesting to me. I wanted to let everybody know before I get into the show this week that the Getting Clear conference that happened, I think back in June in Toronto, is now up online. That was professionally videoed. Professor James Beverly and John Atack, the coordinators of the conference, hired a crew to do that, and they are a whole series. I think there's like 20 or 30 hours of video conference available on Vimeo. So I've put the link also below, and you can check that out and check out the conference. And of course, I'm talking about it because I was at it. And spoke at a few of the points during it, and thought I did a decent job. But honestly, and in all seriousness, it is an amazing conference, and there were speakers that way blew me away. I mean, there were professionals and lawyers and activists from France and Australia and Russia, as well as the United States and the UK. And it is invaluable to anybody who is a Scientology watcher, a critic, anybody who's interested in Scientology in any way. The Getting Clear conference absolutely will give you the lowdown in ways that you've never seen before, with some of the best speakers I've ever heard talking about the subject. So I can't recommend it enough, and so you should head on over to Vimeo and you should check it out. And it is worth the money that is being asked for to watch it. I also want to congratulate Alex Gibney for having won 3 Emmys for Going Clear: Scientology and the Prison of Belief. This was an HBO-produced documentary that absolutely blew me away. And I in fact made a video on my channel here about it when it came out, and I wrote a review about the movie when I saw it, and I can't say enough good things about it. If you have not seen Going Clear, and you are at all interested in what Scientology is really all about, then you need to run, not walk, to any location where you can see that documentary, because it is well worth seeing. And as I understand it, it's going to be coming out in theaters. They actually were going to have it down at a theater in Clearwater, and apparently the Church of Scientology rattled their saber and got that theater to not show it. So it's going to be shown at an alternate theater down in Clearwater, or down in that area, because Scientology's censorship efforts aside, the truth about Scientology is out there and it's everywhere. So let's get on with your questions. James Smart: I had heard of connections with the beginnings of Scientology and Dianetics with certain occult practices, and that L. Ron Hubbard was interested in some occult subjects. Given that the internet can be an unreliable source of information on such topics, are you able to shed a little more light on the matter? Also, thank you for creating content that is both informative and entertaining. I hadn't really paid a lot of attention to this until fairly recently, when I was looking into L. Ron Hubbard's life and looking to answer the question for myself once and for all, whether he was a con man or whether he had really believed in what he was doing when he started Dianetics and Scientology. And I've come up with an answer to that question, and I'm putting it in my book, and there's a whole chapter on it. And so I had to look into this period in the 1940s, between 1945 or so and 1950, when Dianetics was written, because it's a very interesting period of time. And it's a time when L. Ron Hubbard hooked up with Jack Parsons, who was a rocket scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. And Hubbard stayed in Parsons' mansion, and he practiced the occult with Jack Parsons. There's no question about it. He absolutely did that. And from that, I'm sure he learned a great number of things that he plagiarized for his materials in Scientology later on. I don't have it all nailed yet as to exactly what he did and didn't take from that, because I'm actually still in the middle of studying it myself. But did that happen? Yes, it did. Now, I think probably the best resource to get a complete answer to the question on this is Russell Miller's book, Barefaced Messiah, which is an amazing biography on L. Ron Hubbard and covers this in great detail. Russell Miller was an amazing author in going through and researching and interviewing people on this subject. Hubbard got involved with Parsons, I believe, because he did actually have occult leanings and some occult beliefs. And I believe that because of what came out in 1940, what Hubbard wrote in 1946, 1947, thereabouts, which are later referred to as the Affirmations. A very powerful set of documents that Hubbard wrote as a sort of series of self-hypnosis commands. This was after he was involved with Parsons. He engaged in a con on Parsons and ripped him off for a bunch of money and got caught out by Parsons on that and took off. And after that happened, Hubbard wrote these affirmations. And they're available online, and they're absolutely fascinating in terms of a window into this guy's psyche. But in those affirmations, which Hubbard never meant anybody else to ever lay eyes on, he talks about his guardian angel, and he even talks about Jack Parsons and how he considers him still a friend, which is totally bizarre. And talks in there about things that clearly indicate that he's got occult beliefs. So I think he really believed that. Now, as to how much that belief bled into Dianetics and Scientology, that's another matter. Jonathan Mark. L. Ron Hubbard said, "Man is a spiritual being. When you were a Scientologist, what did that mean to you? Do you still believe it? Is it a testable proposition?" Hubbard refers to man as a spiritual being in the sense that there is this quantity, this untouchable, unreachable quantity called life. And Hubbard used the Greek letter theta to refer to this quantity or quality. And he put it in those terms because it was something that was beyond matter, energy, space, and time. It was something that had no wavelength, no mass, no existence in the physical universe, and yet did exist. And it's an interesting concept, and one that I've, not fully held on to, but still think with a bit. When I think of things in a spiritual sense, that's how I tend to think of them. I don't think of them in terms of ectoplasm and Ghostbusters and spirits moving through astral planes and whatnot. I don't really think of spiritual things that way, and that's pretty clearly because of my Scientology upbringing. So I tend to think of it in terms of a something that is nothing. In other words, it exists, but it doesn't exist in the same terms as, say, a hammer and nails exist. So that's what Hubbard meant by spiritual being. It is completely and totally untestable by its very nature. It is 100% a matter of faith and belief, because how do you measure something that doesn't really exist? And in fact, Hubbard sort of wrote himself into a corner with this because he then associates thetans, spiritual beings, individual units of theta that have consciousness and awareness and perception, and he sort of associates them with bodies and the fact that they were somehow tricked and fooled into thinking that they were bodies and that they were mess, that they were matter, energy, space, and time, right? In other words, that they confuse their nothingness with somethingness, and that's how you trap them. And that's all very interesting, but he takes the concept way too far when he gets into body thetans and the fact that these thetans can somehow make matter, energy, space, time, or somehow be part of matter, energy, space, time. That's confusing. It's logically inconsistent, and it sort of throws his whole worldview into doubt as far as I'm concerned because of its illogicness. So no, it really can't be tested. Brian, 26. You've made mention of using the term Muggle while in Scientology, and that you are a huge fan of Star Trek and such. Were you able to read novels and go to the movies and television very often while you were in Scientology? How much free downtime did you really have? Were there any limits on what movies, books, and television shows you could see, aside from the obvious stuff you weren't allowed to look at, like obvious critics of Scientology? Have you seen or heard about the movie Bowfinger? If so, what do you think about Mindhead? Thanks, love your videos. When it comes to books and movies, the Sea Organization is not totally in a bubble world where none of that exists. Movies are used as a rewards and penalties sort of system in the Sea Org, where if you get your stats up and you work really hard, then maybe there would be what's called an org award, where everybody would go traipse off and go see a movie. The more that I was in the Sea Org, I got into the Sea Org in 1995, and within 5 years or so, going to the movies on an org award was almost unheard of. Very, very rare did that happen, unless it was a Tom Cruise movie, in which case Tom Cruise actually arranged tickets or paid for all the people on the Sea Org base to go see the movie that he had been in, and a lot of Tom Cruise movies were seen that way. Not movies like Eyes Wide Shut. No, but I'm talking about when he was back in the fold and everything was all hunky-dory with him again. Did we go see like The Last Samurai, for example? That was one that was paid for, and I'm sure some other Minority Report and some of his more recent ones, like the Mission Impossible movies and whatnot. As far as books go, people can read fantasy and sci-fi and any kind of fiction books they want to. You're never going to find a Sea Org member reading Going Clear or something like that. That kind of book would just be completely banned on the base. So that's not going to happen. And they don't watch TV. TV is there are not TVs on the base, at least not for regular Sea Org members. RTC, I'm sure, have TVs and all kinds of luxuries, but your regular Sea Org members do not. Regular Sea Org members get DVDs and CDs, and they listen to music, or they watch movies in their room, mostly in secret, on their little laptops or on their tablets or whatever they might have access to, but they don't have regular cable TV or anything like that. That's verboten. When I was out on missions and projects in the later years of my Sea Org experience, I downloaded some TV shows and would watch them in secret at night on my laptop. And I got kind of interested in some TV shows. I had a good time with some of those. I think that's where I started watching The Mentalist and things like that. Just regular TV, nothing too insane. But it was totally off the rails that I was doing that. That was absolutely against the rules, and I would have gotten in a lot of trouble for having done that, because you're supposed to be nose to the grindstone, And as far as asking about Bowfinger, that movie was banned. That would be an example of a movie that nobody in Scientology would go see. Nobody went and saw The Master. Nobody went and saw Going Clear. Those are movies that you're just not going to be exposed to or be allowed to go see in the Sea Org. Thomas Schmitz. How does one move or graduate from one OT level to the next? What is the determination of a person being able to move to the next OT level? Why does it take so long to be at a particular level before one moves up to the next? Also, roughly, would you know how much financially each OT level costs? If the OT levels are the person auditing themselves, and you mentioned hours and hours of it, does that mean hours and hours each and every day? How does one find the time? Okay, well, clearly the OT levels are still something that people are very interested in knowing more about, so let's talk a little bit more about them. I did not do the OT levels. I sold them, though, and so I can say that when I was a registrar and I was selling them, that OTs 1, 2, and 3, this is back in 2003, 2004 time period. When I sold the OT levels, OT 1, 2, and 3 were a package, and I think it was about $15,000 for the package. So you do OT 1, 2, and 3, and that's all solo, right? So you're auditing yourself. So it's basically you go in a course room, do the courses, then you audit yourself. OT 4 and OT 5 are sold in blocks of 12 and a half hours of auditing. In Scientology, a block of 12 and a half hours is called an intensive. So you buy a certain number of intensives based on what they estimate it's going to take for you to get through it. And those intensives are on a sliding scale depending on how many you buy at a time. It's not consistent. If you buy one, it's $6,000. If you buy 10, then they come down to $4,000 each, you see. So the more you buy, the cheaper they get per intensive. And it would usually take, when I was around, and again, same time period, OT4 was usually 2 intensives, and OT5 was usually 5 to 6 intensives. That's my best memory of that. So, you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in intensives, and that's also doesn't count the eligibility. When you go and do OT 1, 2, and 3, you first have to do a thing called OT eligibility, which is a security check, which is a bunch of questions that they interrogate you on to make sure that you're not a security risk and that you're going to go take the materials and leak them on the internet or something like that. And there's a bunch of questions that they ask you, and they ask you all about your personal life and family and everything they feel like asking you about. After you finish 1 through 3, if you take any break at all before you go on to 4 and 5, then when you come back, you're going to be doing eligibility again, because who knows what trouble you got into since you last left. And so you do an intensive or 2 of eligibility, in addition to the intensive or 2 of OT4. And then if you go after OT4 and you go off again and you don't go right on to OT5, when you come back, you're going to have to do eligibility again. So you can end up doing eligibility over and over and over again. Not necessarily the same questions either. They might ask you different questions at different times. It's all arbitrary. Then when you get through OT5 and you go on to OT6, which is a big course at Flag in Clearwater, Florida. I don't actually know how much that course was. I'm guessing about $5,000. Anybody who's watching this who actually has hard data on it, though, please don't hesitate to put it in the comments section. And then OT7 is solo audited at home. So you pay for, as I understand it, you pay for the level by paying for CSing time. So what does that mean? Basically, when you're auditing on the OT levels, you're keeping worksheets of what's going on in the session. You're sitting there handling your body thetans or whatever it is that you're doing in the session with the e-meter, and you're writing notes. Those notes go into a folder, and that folder goes to somebody who's called the case supervisor, and he monitors your progress every single session. And to answer your question of how you get through the OT levels, there's a specific end result that they're looking for you to say or think or somehow manifest, which will tell them that you're done. And each level has its own specific end result. And you do the level until you reach that end result. And I don't know off the top of my head what the specific end result for 1, 2, and 3 and 4 and 5 are. I don't know. I didn't do them and I didn't study it that closely. But those end results exist, and the case supervisor's job is to make sure that you're doing the procedures properly and that you reach the proper end result, which is something you will say or write in your worksheets. Or if you say, hey, look, I think I'm done, they might call you in and sit you down and do an interview with you and ask you, well, what's happened while you've been doing this level? And you'll say, oh, well, I was doing this and suddenly red became blue and now the whole world looks, blue to me and it's great. Then they go, oh, great, that's the end result we were looking for, and now you're done, right? And that's how those levels work. Now, it is done every day, okay? When you're solo auditing, you have to agree to make time to do it every single day without any exception whatsoever, period. So that kind of motivates people to want to, get through them, but also it's just they just have to work out their life to do it. And that's the sacrifice they make for Scientology. And that means that people who are Scientologists who are auditing out those BTs on OT7 which takes years to get through. Nobody gets through OT7 quickly. It is a years-long process. You're doing that process every single day, and not only once a day. They actually want you auditing, taking yourself into a solo session and doing the thing with the meter and all that 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 times a day. Now the sessions on OT7 are pretty short. They don't go more than a few minutes at a time from what I understand. A really long session for OT5 or OT7 is, a really long session would be half an hour. So you go in, you do the procedure, you have whatever, great experience you have, and then you're done, and you go take a break. And I know people on OT7, I knew people who would get up at 4 or 5 in the morning, take themselves in session 2 or 3 times, go to work, maybe come home for lunch, do a session, come home at night from work, do 2 or 3 sessions. So they really are, when you're on OT7, you are really dedicating yourself to the cause. And it's work. There's not one person who I've ever talked to who was on OT7 who didn't say that it was a goddamn chore to do. And they were definitely ready to finish by the time they, after a few years of this. So that's kind of what goes on there. Cheryl Berry. Hi, Chris. Listening to your Q&As has so far cleared up a lot. Great work. When you refer to the original concept of Scientology as opposed to what it has become today, what exactly is that? I've heard many ex-Scientologists state they still believe in the concept, just not COB's current reign and all the abuses, etc. What exactly does auditing do that is beneficial? Also, how in the world do the Squirrel Busters get away with so blatantly harassing and berating ex-members as they do? Good Lord, they even advertise themselves on their chests. When I refer to the original idea of Scientology in some of my videos, what I was talking about there was an idea that I had at that time about how Scientology originally was this thing that Hubbard developed in order to help people, and that they would come in and pay money to do services, and there would be an exchange, for example, and that they would move up this bridge to total freedom. And that's sort of my concept of the original idea of Scientology. I contrast that with David Miscavige's idea of Scientology because he's turned it into something completely different, where he doesn't care about people doing services, he just wants their money. And it's a very blatant money grab now, where there used to be the idea that there was an exchange and there were services. Now that idea doesn't exist so much. It exists some, but not to us old school people who were around in the 80s, or much less those in the 60s and 70s, where it was a real service-driven sort of organization. And now it's not. Now you walk in and they sell you stuff, or you do some services, and then they you do them over again and over again and over again, and they just keep you in a hamster wheel, and it's ridiculous. That wasn't what Scientology was when I got involved with it. And if it had been, I don't know that I ever would have gotten as involved in it. So that's the contrast that I'm making when I'm talking about those two different things. Now, as far as the Squirrel Busters go, I'll give you a twofer here. The Squirrel Busters never expected to be posted all over the internet. They were broadcasting themselves to intimidate Marty Rathbun and the people that he and his wife, Monique, and the people who were going to see Marty at the time, who were getting services from Marty. Marty at that time was delivering Scientology out of his home, and he's since quit that and doesn't do that anymore. But people were coming to him, and so those Squirrel Busters were there to intimidate and harass Marty and his wife Monique and anybody else who came around there. But they really didn't think the thought through very much about the idea that all of that would be posted all over the internet, and they would end up with massive egg all over their face. Sandy Q. Thank you again, Chris, for sharing your personal experiences and well-reasoned arguments. I learned this week that someone very close to me had been manipulated, swindled more like it, by her former boss, who was a Scientologist and a physician. She was very close to losing all of her savings. Fortunately, she confronted him head-on, challenged his claims, and quit her job. I've heard that Scientology targets physicians, dentists, and vets. Why is this? Should we be concerned about the motives of the people we trust with our lives and our pets' lives? Scientology targets doctors, chiropractors, vets is a new one to me. Doctors, chiropractors, businessmen were something I was definitely aware of. But it doesn't surprise me that you go after vets too, because doctors classically are people with money. And Scientology targets anybody who's got money. That's what they're after. And when you're looking to swindle people out of their money, that's what you do, is you go after people who are willing to be swindled out of their money. And unfortunately, despite the fact that a lot of doctors have degrees and years of schooling, they're not necessarily trained in critical thinking or actually scientific theory, or how science actually works on a philosophical level, right? Which is an important part of education in regards to developing logic and critical thinking. You can know all kinds of science and science terms and science methodology, but if you don't know the philosophy behind it and why science is the way that it is, then you can still not be a critical thinker, and you can fall for all kinds of woo, all kinds of nonsense. And I'm sorry, but Dr. Oz to me is an example of that on a nationwide, international-wide scale. Here's a doctor, he's really a doctor, and he really peddles pseudoscientific nonsense, right? Because he believes some of that, or at least he says he does. So that, just because somebody is well-schooled, my point being, just because somebody is well-schooled doesn't mean that they are not liable to fall for pseudoscience or woo or just plain nonsense. And that's what Scientologists do, and there's a whole arm of Scientology that has consultants and professionals who go in and offer professional consulting services to these doctors and chiropractors and vets and business people. And then when the consulting looks like it might be doing something, it doesn't, but when it looks like it's kind of doing something, then they move in with the actual Scientology and try to get the guy to come into the church and start doing services at the church. Because look, if L. Ron Hubbard was really good on the business side, he must really have a whole philosophy of life that you need. You see, that's the dots they connect. And they're very, very good at doing that. So they hoodwink quite a few of these people. Andy Mack. Hi Chris, I'm a big fan of your channel and all the positive work you've been doing since leaving the Church of Scientology. Now, on to my question. I've recently read the story Brian Sheen posted on the Underground Bunker. Part of it mentioned Mr. Sheen, whose daughter suddenly stopped speaking to him thanks to him getting an SP declare, trying to get his daughter's new in-laws, big in the church, huge IAS donations, to perhaps use their sway to get the church to reconsider the declare. In Going Clear, Sarah Goldberg mentions petitioning the declare against her son, Nick Lister. Well, that didn't work, and the jury is still out, so to speak, in the case of Brian Sheen. So my question is, do you know of any time or situation where the Church of Scientology changed their collective mind on a declared SP? Aside from someone earning back their favorability by doing A through E, it seems to me that the church is rather stubborn, to put it mildly, and once they make a decision, that is that for this lifetime. Are there any other situations where the church would or could say, oops, we were wrong, and then reverse a decision about something? Just to clarify for anybody who doesn't know, that A through E steps that are being referred to there by Andy are the steps that the Church of Scientology demands a person take in order to go from being a declared suppressive person to getting back into good standing with the church. And they basically make you run through hoops and pay a lot of money and spend months or years making up and doing all these amends and all this nonsense to prove your loyalty to the church so that they'll allow you back in the fold. Any suppressive person can do these steps. I mean, I could, theoretically go to the church and originate, that I really want to do these A to E steps, and if I did them, then eventually they might let me back into the fold. I'm never going to do those. Now, as far as the church admitting that it was wrong about something, well, look, I'll just be really blunt and simple and to the point on this. No. The Church of Scientology does not ever admit it's wrong about anything. It won't go there. It can't go there. And I actually talked about this in one of my very first videos about Scientology. It's Hubbard's way or the highway. There are no other ways about it, and there is no wrong that Scientology can ever do. All of their policies, all of their technology, all of their whole organizational thrust is designed to make you feel like it was all your fault if something went wrong. It's never on the church. And on that happy note, we are going to be ending off on this edition of our Q&A show. So thank you very much for coming by and watching. I really appreciate your viewership. If you have any questions or comments or feedback, feel free to leave them in the comments section below on this video, or you can email me at askchrisshelton@gmail.com. I hope this is of value to you and that you're getting something out of this series, and that you'll consider throwing some support my way, either by becoming part of my Patreon campaign or using the support button on this video. Thank you very much, and I will see you next week.